In 2008, the National Housing Corporation began its program to transform tenants who have been renting their units for 20 years or more into first-time homeowners. Since then, the legislation has been updated to ensure an even smoother transition for prospective tenants from renting to ownership. But first, here is a reminder of how the process works.
Since persons would have been renting the units for 20 years or more, that they would in most cases have satisfied the economic costs of the property and therefore ought to benefit by way of the free transfer of the unit once they would have satisfied their rental requirements. It is no secret also that the corporation has been hamstrung in finding new areas for development. Land in Barbados is a pretty scarce commodity, and therefore if we are going to be promoting an era of home ownership, it meant that those people who already occupied units should be given the opportunity to own them.
Some special conditions apply in order for tenants to be entitled to have their units conveyed to them.
Generally, the person who benefits from the unit has to be domiciled in Barbados and has to be in occupancy of the unit. There are cases where persons who are the official tenant does not live in the unit. That person does not benefit. They have the power to assign to an individual who has been occupying the unit for 20 years or more. But by and large, we want persons who actually live in the units to be the ones benefiting from this program. We don't want situations where tenants of note return to the units after many years of absence and displace persons who would have been there consistently for 20 or more years and benefit by this program. I must stress that this program is for those persons who would have been occupying the unit for 20 or more years.
The policy is that the units are transferred to tenants free once you've lived in the unit for 20 years and you are in good financial standing. That means that you don't owe us any rent. So you have to bring your rent up to date. Once that is in place and you've lived in the unit for 20 years, then the transfer is largely free. What happens is the tenant is responsible for all expenses and all legal fees. You can opt to hire an attorney from outside, or you can opt to use the National Housing Corporation's legal department to do the legal work for you. If you use the in-house counsel, it is entirely free. We can't control what happens with external counsel. But tenants do have the option of using NHC's attorneys, and that way they don't pay any legal fees at all. The expenses are minimal, it's under $100, and those are the expenses in terms of having the conveyance recorded at a land registry. We also record the lot plan so that if the tenant loses the plan, they can always go back to the land registry and get a copy. So that's really for their benefit. So in all, it's roughly about $70, $80. That's the most that people have paid so far.
The stumbling block came, however, through unauthorized add-ons that had been made to the units over time, thus inhibiting the 20-year transfers.
A lot of tenants actually, because they're under pressure for space, families have grown and so on, made extensions to the units which were not sanctioned by the chief town planner. And that prevented us from handing out the conveyances because we were unable to obtain something called a certificate of compliance. The certificate of compliance is issued from the town planning department, and we cannot go ahead and do the transfers until we've received that certificate of compliance. So where people had illegal extensions or had added on those kinds of things, then the town planner refused to grant the certificate of compliance. In that case, then we were held up. We couldn't do the transfer. So there were some tenants who, yes, received their offer letter. They returned it saying they accepted the offer. But then we had to put that on hold because we didn't have the certificate of compliance. So that was the problem.
This was resolved when Parliament recently passed the National Housing Transfer of Terrace Units Act.
And this is what we refer to as special legislation. This now will allow us to transfer those units that we couldn't previously transfer because they had unauthorized extensions. So under this legislation now, we'll be able to go ahead and do those transfers. Of course, the legislation requires that the units be sound, the extensions be sound, and once they're structurally sound and they don't compromise any health legislation or any health standards, then we can go ahead and transfer. Now that the legislation has been passed, we expect that we will be able to transfer more units to tenants. So we should really see a greater transfer of units to tenants. So that's one of the big benefits of the legislation. However, the way how the transfers will be done will be fairly organized and structured. So yes, tenants are anxious to get their transfers, and they will get them, their conveyances, but it will be done over a period of time, and we will make sure that everything is in order. Because even though we have the legislation now, we still have to make sure that the other documents are in place. So once everything is in place and we go through the various estates, we do it in an orderly fashion. So tenants needn't worry. You know, they will get their conveyances. Everybody won't get theirs all at once, but they will get their conveyances.
Thank you all very much for this talk of appreciation piece of the rock. Thank you all.
So it was a good help to own it. And I'm proud.
Even though an occupant may not be the registered tenant, if such a person lived in a unit for 20 years or more, then he or she is still eligible to benefit from the 20-year transfer program.
A person who would have occupied the unit for 20 or more years and who would be in good standing with their rents, meaning that their rents are paid up in full, qualifies for the transfer of the units. Notice that I said occupant because over the years a number of people have occupied the corporation's units and would not have been official tenants at the time. We thought that having allowed those people to stay in the units all that time, that they too ought to benefit.
Provision has also been made for those tenants who have not yet been living in the units for 20 years.
Persons who are now occupying the units but who do not yet satisfy the 20-year requirement should be able to buy out the remaining years to 20. So for example, if an individual has been occupying the property for 18 years, that person can now pay forward the additional 2 years rent and benefit from the program. This is significant in that it allows persons to become homeowners and to move forward with their lives. Many of the individuals who benefit from this program will now have a tangible asset that they can use for other purposes. They may have children who want to study. They may want to do extensions to the properties. So they now have the collateral means to approach financial institutions to do so.
Certain implications arise in a case where a qualified tenant passes away.
Where a tenant has received an offer letter, that's the starting point, under the 20-year program, and the tenant has returned to the corporation that offer letter, accepting the offer, then if the person dies before we get a chance to make the transfer, what happens in that case is that the person's estate then becomes the beneficiary. So what will happen then is the tenant's either executor or administratrix or administrator will then present to us letters of administration or letters testamentary, and then we will do the transfer to the estate. So the person's estate then becomes the beneficiary once they have returned the offer letter to us, accepting that offer.
Everyone involved benefits under the National Housing Transfer of Terrace Units Act, including the National Housing Corporation itself, as this now allows that agency to focus on future projects.
This new legislation really allows the corporation to move forward with its work. Once we have satisfied all the technical and legal requirements and we transfer these units, and we undertake our commitments in terms of satisfying the outstanding maintenance, the corporation will now be able to move forward with its program of constructing new apartments for rent, As you know, we would have started with the high-rise structures. We're going to be doing our infills. So once we can free up the maintenance costs from the existing older units, we can be in a position to plan much better for the maintenance of the newer units that will come on stream. It will also mean better deployment of our maintenance staff. It will allow the corporation to undertake more projects in-house. As you are aware, we've started with our in-house building program. One would have seen the excellent work done at Fortis Roads, and there are many more such projects that the corporation will be attempting in the not too distant future. So this legislation really frees up the corporation in terms of its finances, in terms of its technical resources.
Of the 2,500 persons who have applied to benefit from the program, 180 of these have received their letters of conveyance. With the passage of legislation, many more tenants will now be able to obtain their conveyances.
Okay, we've been able to do transfers in a majority of the estates. We've done transfers at Haynesville. We've done a significant amount of transfers at Bonnets. We've also done transfers in the Ivy. We've done some in Maynards, that's in St. Peter, Bagatelle, that's St. Thomas. So we have been able to do across the housing estates, the majority of housing estates, we've been able to effect some transfers. Eden Lodge as well.
The National Housing Transfer of Terrace Units Act will not only relieve some tenants of the burden of having to pay rent, it will also bring the corporation closer to achieving its goal of working to ensure that every Barbadian has his or her very own piece of the rock.